Jess, can we dim the lights a little bit so you guys can nap in peace? Thanks to Creative Mornings for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about what is kind of a big subject. And in fact, I will admit that when I first was asked to do this and accepted, I was kind of paralyzed for a couple of days because revolution is a huge topic. I mean, the easy part of these presentations is saying yes, because your ego says, yeah, sure, I'll get up in front of people and act like an expert. And then when you realize that you have to kind of say something interesting and not trite about such a big subject, it becomes difficult. So I did what all designers do, which is start saying, well, does it have to be about revolution? What if it was? And I finally realized that the way into this for me, and the way that I could kind of maybe say something that maybe you haven't heard before or framed it in a different way, was to make it personal. So we're about to go on a little journey. I'm going to take you through 2 countries and 4 cities and talk about some things I've seen, because as it turned out, when I started thinking about the idea of revolution, I've seen some pretty cool shit. So let's get rolling. We're going to start in 1968 in Mexico City. 1968 was a pretty momentous year, if you remember. That's the year that Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King were killed. The first Apollo spaceship orbited the Earth. And in Mexico City, the Olympics were held. My family moved there when I was 5, so I moved there in the year that the Olympics were held. The Olympics that year were themselves pretty revolutionary. You had Bob Beamon, who set a long jump record that stood for like 25 years afterwards. You had the winners of the 200 meters holding their hands high in a Black Power salute when they received their medals. On the other end, or what some people would consider the other end of the political spectrum, George Foreman was waving American flags over the people he had defeated. And a scrawny white guy named Dick Fosbury revolutionized the way that the high jump was performed by going over the bar backwards. I don't remember much of that. I mean, when you're 5, some of these things go over your head. But my parents did take me to a couple of Olympic events, and I do remember the sort of just the vastness of the spectacle, particularly as we walked into the stadium. But if you're a graphic designer, if you're interested in communications, then the thing that probably stands out about the '68 Olympics is the amazing identity system designed by a team led by Lance Wyman. For me, this is one of the this is easily the best Olympic identity and one of the kind of best corporate or event identities ever. It's got everything. It's punchy. It's memorable. It is both of its time. I mean, it references like the op art experiments that were going on at the time. It also references where it came from. There are references to these kind of radial lines that appear in Mexican art. It also took some chances. You're not supposed to mess with the Olympic rings when you design Olympic logos. And Lance Wyman and his team went for it. Did a like. Yeah, we'll mess with the Olympic rings, and we're going to do it so well that you're going to like it and accept it and let us get away with it. And it was more than just a logo, of course. It was a system, and I encourage you to go online sometime and look at the '68 Mexico Olympics. They were held. Mexico didn't have the budget to put on the Olympics that a lot of places do, and so they were using tons of existing buildings and hadn't built entire new villages or infrastructure for the event. So they relied on signage in particular and wayfinding to make sure that people could get around. But the branding for the game has just permeated everything, and you can see that the elements that originated in the logo are used everywhere else. I like the little, where my pointer at? I like the fact that this anticipates the iPod ads by about 30 years. And the one thing that I still find amazing about this identity system, and I think was in fact revolutionary, was just how relentlessly visual it was. You know, if you think about it, the Olympics, you've got people coming from literally hundreds of places around the globe who don't speak the language, and you need to communicate with them. So language may not be the best way to go, but pictures can step into the breach and help communicate. So this is a ticket stub. And I just want to dive in a little bit, and man, these are cool. So with very few words, we can learn a lot. We know a lot about where we need to go just based on this ticket stub. We know the event because there's a series of icons. There's an icon connected with each event. Hey, which level do you think we need to go to? And what entrance are we going into? And what row are we in? And what seat are we in? Hey, what time does it start? All this stuff with basically, what, 1, 2, 3 words and a few numbers. I mean, this is great stuff, and in my mind, unmatched sense. You know, one of the things that countries use the Olympics for is to kind of introduce themselves on the big stage. Like, we have arrived. We're no longer a developing country. We're part of the first world club. We can host Olympics. And Mexico was no different. And sadly, not unlike, say, recent events in the World Cup in Brazil, and pretty much every Olympics and World Cup since, countries are so eager to project a happy, smiling face to the world that they pretty much try and sanitize and hide any of the less photogenic parts of their city or their country. And keep those away from visitors. And so leading up to the Olympics, you know, '68 was also the year of student riots and a temporary, like, anarchist takeover of Paris. And so there was, you know, unrest was in the air, and Mexico City was no different. There had been demonstrations led by students throughout the year, and just a couple of weeks before the Olympics were held, there was a police massacre of more than 40 people, none of which really made international news. The Mexican government kind of managed to, with the collusion of international news agencies, sort of keep that to themselves. And so you had this kind of parallel universe where, on the one hand, this amazing identity system with these icons that, you know, would not look out of place on your iPhone screen, coexisted with these student graphics that sort of mocked the purity of that intention with the reality on the ground, which was that tanks and bayonets and jackboots and grenades were being deployed by the country against its own citizens. And the beautiful Mexico '68 logo was used by student designers in an entirely different way. You see the Olympic rings turned into, whoa, sorry about that, getting ahead of ourselves. A little preview, we're headed to New York next. You see the Olympic rings being turned into tank treads, and the Olympic rings then you know, aren't quite as noble when they become chains that prevent expression. And I had seen this before, but I had never noticed that there's there's like a made in USA on the lock, and I'm not really sure what that's about. Although there is a saying in Mexico that is, it's kind of a lamentation that is, Mexico so far from God, so close to the United States. So I'm going to get some water. So that was you know, as a 5-year-old, like I said, I wasn't necessarily aware of this, and part of putting this presentation together made me want to talk to my parents, and they're out of the country right now. But when they get back, I'm going to ask them if they were at all worried about, you know, bringing a family into you know, kind of what was sort of civil unrest. All right, so now we're gonna scoot ahead a little bit. The year is 1990, and I was just getting my start as a graphic designer. This was back when, I don't know if you guys remember newspapers. There were these things called classified ads, where if you wanted a job, they would list jobs and you would read them and make phone calls. It was crazy. But anyway, my wife wanted to get into television production. I wanted to be a graphic designer, and in the Sunday New York Times, which was available even in a dark outpost like Phoenix, there's an entire page of graphic designer listings, and I thought surely someone in this city, someone among these hundreds of listings will give me a job. So I went to New York, and that was a pretty awesome time to be in New York. You've got Poison banging out of cars. There's always a summer anthem every year in New York. There's sort of one song that you can't escape, and that's me rocking a haircut that I didn't realize at the time, but was actually not that far from John Bon Jovi's look. Although I've since adopted the sort of Sinead O'Connor approach. But aside from the kind of inescapable sounds of music in New York, the other thing that I saw when I got there or heard about were protests by this group called ACT UP. And ACT UP stands for AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. And it was a group of folks who were tired of what they perceived of as government indifference and inaction in the face of an AIDS epidemic that had been going for at least half a decade at that point. And so one of the things that I saw in the news when I moved to New York was actions like this, where ACT UP took over Grand Central Station and kind of paralyzed commuter traffic to bring attention to their message. And then out on the streets, if you've been in New York, any conceivable surface will be covered by messages, commercial and otherwise. And the folks at ACT UP weren't shy about being in your face with their message. And I was like I'd been a punk rocker in the 80s, and so the shocking imagery wasn't anything new. But a lot of times, punk, and especially as it sort of drifted into the mid 80s, was mostly more about kind of shock value. It was like, we're weird, we're angry, we're different, but it wasn't aimed at a specific message. Whereas ACT UP used that same kind of energy and in-your-faceness about a very specific, very narrow, and for what for a lot of people was a really uncomfortable topic. I mean, talking about sex, about homosexuality, about body fluids, about health policies, and not in a polite way either. Posters like this were not uncommon. Artists, amazing artists got involved since AIDS was disproportionately affecting artists and other creative types. But I think probably the pinnacle, the most powerful image that emerged from this time and from my time in New York was this, I guess you'd call it the logo, produced by Grand Fury, which was the sort of design subset of ACT UP. I mean, as logo lockups go, as a formal piece of design, it's pretty amazing. I mean, you've got the density and tight kerning, the kind of compact seriousness of that super condensed typeface, which is the super condensed weight of Gil Sans. But of course, the bold move, the thing that kind of elevates this and gives this real power, is the appropriation of the Nazi triangle. If you know anything about the concentration camps in World War II, you know that the clever Germans developed ways to categorize the people that they were imprisoning using a series of symbols. I mean, the most well-known is the Jewish star, a yellow star. But being the thorough bastards that they were, they had triangles for any number of people that they considered undesirable. The pink triangle was the symbol for homosexuals. And but the folks at ACT UP managed to combine kind of two really different ideas in this single symbol. The first was AIDS is killing us in a way that we compare to the genocide of Jews and other undesirables by Germans. But also they took the pink triangle and inverted it. So not only was it an accusation, a call to action, there was a little bit of hope implied. So rather than the triangle pointing down, the triangle pointed up. As I was gathering these images together and wanted to show what we were talking about, I was struck, and not in a comfortable way, by the similarities of something like this to some of the sort of, oops, keep giving away the next destination. Struck by the similarities of something like this to a modern brand standards guideline that we might put together. And it's a little sobering to think that that just because something is looks great and is neatly organized and has some kind of semantic logic behind it, that it can't also be probably pretty close to pure evil. All right. You're glad you came this morning, right? Real uplifting way to to kick off the weekend. Woo! Who's gone to Rocky Point? So I said I've gotten to go to some cool places, and yeah, it's a humble brag, but I have. 9 years ago, I got to go to Havana, and it was part of an AIGA program, like a design exchange program, where designers in the US and designers in Cuba created posters on a common topic, and then there was an exhibition in Havana of the posters. So unlike maybe those the two previous destinations where I was sort of maybe in the midst of kind of revolutionary activity or social change, where things were still a little unformed, being in Havana in 2006 is a chance to see what revolution looks like kind of when it's done, and when revolution is sort of holding on to power rather than being an agent of change. And so Havana is everything, or at least 10 years ago, and I hope at least for a few years longer, is kind of everything you thought you might expect it to be. I'm not going to advance it this time. There's ruin porn, there's beautiful colonial buildings, there's great cars, there's amazing people, there's all kinds of political symbols everywhere. In fact, one of the things that was really striking was there's virtually no commercial signage or messaging anywhere. When we drove in from the airport into the city of Havana, I think there was maybe 1 or 2 billboards, and the billboard that I remember was for the annual book fair. And there's a big highway billboard advertising the book fair in Havana, which apparently is a kind of an island-wide phenomenon that everybody comes to. But it was refreshing and a little disorienting to be in a place where where commercial messaging was almost completely absent. What there was, though, was plenty of kind of propaganda and revolutionary messages. And one of the things that I found sort of funny was the realization that, like, revolutionary ideas can be expressed in kind of big, impressive ways. This is Che Guevara, his statue in kind of metal on the side of an office building, or like some of us prefer our revolutionary imagery to be kind of gritty and hand done and weathered. But in the end, like, computers kind of corrupt and make everything boring and banal and the same. And so computers, which were just starting to make their way into everyday Cuban life, had already been put into the service of kind of low-level everyday propaganda. And this is in the lobby of an apartment building. And you know, the language of the revolution is still there. This is the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, and there's a nod to kind of the cause that the government was rallying people around. But there's also the kind of list of what your job was that week as an apartment dweller, and a Happy Father's Day message. And I don't think that's Comic Sans, but it may as well be. And it's outlined, and there's a rainbow gradient, and there's a shadow. And so, if nothing else, you know, you learn that like computers reduce everything to a banal lowest common denominator, even in post-revolutionary Cuba. One thing that was really interesting, though, was kind of seeing your own prejudices and your own point of view kind of reflected, amplified, distorted through the lens of another country. So these are a couple of billboards that are on the Malecón, which is the kind of walkway along the ocean in Havana. And the gentleman on the far right, I use that word loosely, is a guy named, his last name is Posada Carriles, and he was in the Cuban government, and anyway, believes he was in the employ of the CIA when he masterminded a bombing attack on a Cuban Airlines plane in the 70s, which killed everyone aboard. So 70 people died as a result of his bombing. You know, a terrible act that the Cubans rightly consider to be a terrorist act. Now, I'm no fan of George W. Bush, but that's some pretty interesting math. I mean, this guy, you know, I have no respect or sympathy for this guy, but you know, these guys probably, in my humble view, are, you know, kicking his ass in terms of sort of responsibility for deaths, or you know, if you're ranking people on some kind of awful evil scale. Also, again, interesting to see like kind of modern, you know, we have this vision of Cuba as kind of, you know, in amber and, you know, forever stuck in the 50s and 60s. But like I said, you know, computers and modern graphic techniques are making their way into the country. And so you see this kind of, homage or takeoff on an action poster where Bush and Posada Carriles are you know, part of a movie called The Assassin. It was also interesting to see that you know, no opportunity to kind of turn someone's words against them was wasted. This is a Bush quote that said, you know, anyone who gives refuge to terrorists is themselves a terrorist, and so the Cubans, in their mind anyway, were pointing out the hypocrisy of that when the U.S. Oh, I should back up and say the reason the Cubans are particularly mad at the U.S. about this, or were anyway, was that this guy, after spending a few years in South America after the bombing, made his way to the U.S., and the U.S. has never been willing to extradite him to Cuba to face charges. So they see the U.S. as harboring terrorists. But the real reason, we're going to end on we're moving towards a slightly more upbeat conclusion, folks. But the kind of, for me, the sort of the most revolutionary and kind of life-changing part of my visit to Cuba was the opportunity to see firsthand the amazing work of Cuban poster artists, and particularly Cuban poster artists who did work for movies. To make a sweeping generalization, Cubans love their movies, and the Cuban government recognized that, and so even right from the beginning, even when the government was kind of controlling all forms of entertainment and popular culture, movies were brought in from Europe, from England, and even some American movies. The Godfather played in Havana when it came out. But these movies would generally come in kind of one at a time, and they weren't really subject to any commercial competition. It wasn't like you had a choice of 15 movies to go see. You were seeing that movie that week. So The Cuban government basically, in kind of a make-work program, gave a small group of graphic designers the freedom to create posters for these movies as they came in. And so unlike maybe other kinds of speech where the ideas and the messaging were tightly controlled, the job of the Cuban film poster designer was just to make something that looked cool and had some kind of reference either visually or thematically to the movie's content. And so the Cuban designers took what they knew about creating propaganda. They took their own previous poster and communication traditions, and they especially looked to the European avant-garde and to Eastern European poster makers to create what I think is really one of the most amazing bodies of graphic design work in the 20th century. And so I'm going to show you some examples. And what's instructive, and I couldn't find a good example, I just had a low-res one from an old presentation. It's instructive to look at the posters that the Cuban artists did and then see if you can find the corresponding European or American poster at the time, and see what a difference it makes when commercial, kind of the commercial imperative is removed, and it's strictly about kind of communicating the filmmaker's intent, and you know, what a difference that makes. So one thing that's cool also is that you know, these like say Milton Glaser and Paul Rand, a lot of these designers sign their names, or at least their names are printed. So you can kind of, you can sort of spot what year and who they were made and who did them. So I want to roll through a few of these from various eras, and I'm just always kind of struck by the kind of power and in some cases simplicity, sometimes just amazing complexity that these posters have, and how you can pretty much see the whole history of you know, the second half of the 20th century of graphic design kind of coming together in this unique way. The other thing that makes these posters such an achievement was Cuba had, you know, from almost the very beginning has operated under economic sanctions from the U.S. And so these aren't people who walked into a rooms filled with art supplies and the latest technologies. These are all you know, made with humble silk screens, and sometimes the ink color choice was determined by what was available that day. Like, we have a lot of red this month, so that's what we're going to use. Also, if you look at the type, you know, obviously you can't tell on kind of a coarse projection like this, but you know, sometimes what looks like a typeface is not a typeface. This is somebody who found an interesting-looking font in a magazine from the time or a previous poster, and was actually cutting out each individual letter in a mask to use for the silkscreen. In fact, you can see in, I don't know if you can see it or not, but if you look at a high-res version of this, you can see there's little stencil cuts in here, and sometimes even body copy size type was hand cut to get the desired effect. I had the opportunity to visit the institute, the National Institute for the National kind of Filmmaking Institute, which were the people that coordinated the import of movies and the creation of these posters. And the head of the institute, this guy in his late 20s, took us to their archives and showed us some of these posters. And you would imagine, like, if this was a collection that was part of the holdings of the Museum of Modern Art or something like that, you'd be going into a temperature-controlled room, and these would be between acid-free layers of paper, or in something that was dedicated at all costs to preventing their decay. In Cuba, these are basically just inside of a big portfolio that the curator dragged out and plopped on the table, because they don't have the means and they can't afford anything better. But the effect that made the effect even more powerful as he started to kind of leaf through some of these posters. I mean, if you imagine, like, think of your favorite artist. Like, say you're a Rothko fan or something, and imagine a curator bringing in just a big stack of Rothkos and plopping them down on a table and then just going through them. Being kind of that close to that powerful work and seeing both how immediately affecting it was, also like just moving through it quickly and just having it hit, being hit with wave after wave of kind of brilliant work. And then also, seeing, kind of having the emotional response of, a lot of these things are yellow, they're crackling, who knows how much longer some of these originals are going to be around. For me, that was kind of the closest thing I've had to a religious experience in quite a long time. The Cuban government has taken kind of varying approaches to to kind of capitalism in general, entrepreneurship. That's currently on the upswing. They had to kind of reevaluate their position on this topic when the Soviet Union collapsed and a big portion of the government's funding went with it. But they have realized that these posters are kind of a national treasure and also something where money can be made. And so reproductions of some of those posters are cranked out for sale in the few kind of touristy shops around Havana. So we had the chance to tour the very, very basic rudimentary silkscreen workshop where these are made, and you can see there's still a couple. Still, the black plate has yet to go down on those posters. All right, we're in the home stretch. All right, so our final stop is right here in Phoenix. I landed here 16 years ago, and I think to call what goes on in Phoenix revolutionary, at least in terms of politics, might be a misnomer. I mean, a lot of times to me it feels like Arizona is sort of counter-revolutionary, at least in the way that I like to think about it. But one thing that Arizona is good for, I think, is to politicize you if you haven't already been politicized. So I think it's hard to pay attention to any kind of news and not have a reaction to it. And some of the people and events that are shown here are, I think, have elicited strong reactions from the local artistic community in particular. My particular reaction was 6 years ago I answered an ad on Craigslist that said "Punk Grass Bass Player Wanted." And I was intrigued and I answered it, and I ended up meeting my now bandmate, Mark Sundman, a guy who had taken up the mandolin and armed with righteous anger was performing political songs at open mics and wanted some help. And out of that chance meeting came the band that eventually became the Haymarket Squares. We take our name from something called, depending on your point of view, the Haymarket Massacre, the Haymarket Affair, the Haymarket Riot that happened in Chicago in 1886, where a group of labor protesters and anarchists and 8-hour-day agitators had gotten together to protest the killing of one of their of a striking worker the day before. So the Haymarket Affair actually happened the day after May Day on May 2nd. And in the course of events, somebody threw a bomb, the police opened fire, people died, and the authorities' response was to immediately arrest a bunch of people, anarchists and labor leaders, many of whom had nothing to do with the march, or at least were not even there. A couple of them died. One committed suicide in prison. But anyway, I'm sorry. I thought this was going to be the uplifting finish. But the Haymarket Square in Chicago has become, and this event has become kind of a touchstone for anarchists and labor activists ever since. I'll be honest, when we were looking 6 years ago for a band name, this sounded kind of cool. And it's like, oh, well, that was kind of, they were sort of radical. They had things to say. Let's use that. And I've since met a lot of people for whom that, Haymarket Square is kind of sacred ground. And so it's become not only a name, but also something that that I think we have to, as a band, like live up to. It kind of sets a standard because the folks for whom, or rather the events that took place in Haymarket Square, involved people kind of putting their lives on the line for their ideals. So that's, we try and inject a little bit of humor and soften that a little bit because, we're not Haymarket Square, we're the Haymarket Squares. We're a bunch of dorks who happen to, who play a goofy sort of brand of bluegrass and inject it with political messages, but it is kind of a high standard. Like any good organization, we have our primary logo and a secondary logo used arbitrarily. There's no system. There's no Haymarket Square's brand guidelines. Thankfully, it's just in my head and whatever I want to do. Which is actually a big challenge. I mean, the Haymarket Square stuff is not unlike this presentation, where you're sort of faced with sort of the broad topic of how do I promote a band. I find it a lot more challenging than doing client work. But anyway, so if nothing else, whether it's the message is upbeat or not, we'll close on with some upbeat music. I wanted to play you a couple of our videos. So one of the songs we do is about factory farming, and I think probably regardless of your position on eating meat, you would agree that it would be nice if animals were treated less cruelly in the process of turning them into food. And so we took our little ditty about factory farming to a Kentucky Fried Chicken with these results.
Here we go, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Meet the products of laboratory tests, stuffed in cages, a maze of metal nests, drug card hormones. They grow to their grotesque, it barely passes for a life, and in the end the butcher's knife. They're just animals, what's the harm? Another day of dirty work down on the farm. Meet the workers, their mass reflected blood, see the feathers, and the shit ground in the mud, snap their necks, watch them crumple Thank you, Phoenix. You've been great. Can I give them
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we got the hell out of there. Yeah, the manager said she was calling the cops. I liked how at some points she grabbed the area like above where you're playing. It's like, well, actually the sound happens between the hand and over here. So grabbing up here really doesn't have any effect. A little, you know, full disclosure was we actually went and shot this at a KFC, another KFC, and nothing happened. Like we went in, we played, people kind of looked and smiled, and we left. And I was like, well, fuck, that didn't have the desired effect. So it was our first, I think it was a lesson like in political theater, like it's one thing to like be provocative, but it's even better like when you get a response. So we were like, well, damn it, we got to go find a KFC where people will actually, where we can piss somebody off. So we went back and that one actually, you know, came out perfect. All right, so then one more, and then I'm done. Oh yeah, I'll set up this clip. This next song talks about the evils of a certain weed, and kind of tries to take the kind of long tradition of reefer madness and overreaction to the supposed dangers of marijuana and kind of turn it on its head. So it goes through, if you listen to the lyrics, it goes through a long list of kind of supposed dangers that you might face if you indulge. 1, 2, 3, 4.
There is an evil sprouting up across the land from northern forests to the Arizona sand. It looks so harmless, just an unassuming weed, but the side effects are frightening indeed. It leads to laughter, it leads to tears, it leads to scholarly discussions about the songs of Britney Spears. It leads to munchies so intense that you'll eat Cheetos off the rug. That demon marijuana is a gateway drug. Let's come together to combat this evil scourge before our children become too weak to fight the urge. We'll have to give up some of our rights to save our youth. Our only hope is that they'll one day learn the truth. It leads to headphones, it leads to Floyd, it leads to love the whole world while feeling slightly paranoid. It leads to dangerous activity like unprotected hugs. That demon marijuana is a gateway drug. It's not without its uses for civil rights abuses, for scapegoats and excuses. In this war we're all losers. It leads to pizza, it leads to snacks, it leads to tie-dye trustafarians and smelly hacky sacks. It leads to hope for chemo patients and no promise left for thugs. That demon marijuana is a gateway drug. That demon marijuana is a gateway drug. That demon marijuana is a gateway drug.
there's a lot of B-roll and opportunities to click on things after the video's over. That has a couple lines that I'm kind of proud of, like the it leads to laughter, it leads to tears, it leads to scholarly discussions about the songs of Britney Spears. And although I was, Britney Spears was not on the scene when I was getting high and talking about music, I do know the experience, several decades in my past now, I hasten to add, of talking gibberish when you're, and really enjoying music when you're high. So that's what I've got. I want thank you for your time and attention, and I encourage you to find your own ways to, well, I guess to be both open to the sort of revolutionary activities and possibilities that are happening around you, and to also find a way to take your the things you love, the things you're good at, the things that inspire you, the things that keep you engaged, and sort of find your own revolution. Thanks. How are we doing on time? Do we have any questions? Yeah, we
have about 10 minutes for questions. Or
if anybody has any questions, also at some point I brought in, and I haven't looked at them since I came back from Havana, I've got a bunch of reproductions of Cuban film posters in a roll over here we can dig through, and some books that I found inspiring on this broader topic. But if anybody has any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Or maybe you just have to get to work. Yeah, well.
Mark, you said you went to Havana with like an AIGA sort of. Were you brought there and designed a poster? I mean, did you?
I designed the poster here, and then I think they were printed. I can't remember now if they were printed here or in Havana. But then basically not all of the U.S. designers. There were 7 of us. Not all the U.S. designers went to Havana, but 4 of us did, and so then we met the Cuban counterparts who had done a poster on the same topic, and then there was an exhibition of posters in Havana. And this was the 3rd year of the program, so in addition to the posters that we had done that year, there were posters from the previous years. You know what? I'll post it to like the Creative Mornings Facebook page or something. It was an interesting assignment. It was another one of those ones where the kind of broadness of the topic matter made it really hard to get into. The theme was Love Conquers All, which I thought was really sappy and kind of worthy of a Hallmark card, but also like just a really odd topic when maybe not so much. I don't know. I mean, the history of U.S.-Cuban relations is anything but, has had nothing to do with love, basically. And so the idea that somehow, there's like 40 years of contention to kind of prove that love does not conquer all. So that was an interesting challenge, and I don't know. You can see what I did with it later today. One of the interesting, well, there's a shit ton of interesting things about going to Havana, but was actually the actual getting there. Some folks decided to kind of take the less obvious way, which I think is still an option, of going through another country that doesn't have the same kind of contentious relationship with the U.S. So somebody came through Mexico. You fly to Mexico, then from Mexico to Cuba. Or another guy came from Canada, but there are limited commercial flights between Miami and Havana, and you can actually go there now. I mean, regardless of what changes may have occurred or will occur with the new openness and warmer relations between the countries, you can go. And you could go 10 years ago if you're there on like a scholarly mission or a humanitarian mission. And so one of the things that was drilled into us before we went was when you come back into the U.S., you need to be able to account for your time while you were there. There's some limitations, like you can't spend more than $50 a day. You have to spend 8 hours a day in research or scholarly activities. And then when you get back to the U.S., you have to actually publish the results of your scholarly activities. And so we got a this detailed schedule that had what we were doing basically like every half hour. And I later learned that was just basically to show the immigration people when you came back into the U.S. or if anyone asked, like, yes, I did. The reality was we did studio tours, we wandered around. I mean, we had a much looser experience, but when you looked at it, I mean, there's like a whole list of government officials you're going to meet with. So we sort of, you know, it was kind of a wink and a nod to the actual requirements. But you know, I got on a little plane, a little like twin prop plane in Miami, and flew what seemed like much closer to the water than most you know, transoceanic flights that I've been on, and landed in a very, very humble airport in Havana. The one that serves flights coming from Canada and other countries is much nicer. It's much closer to like a modern airport because they have jets that land there. But the one I flew into was basically probably it was the equivalent of like Mesa Gateway Airport 40 years ago, you know, just something that basically dealt with like private planes.
So there's a quote from Che Guevara, since he was referenced in here, and I'll paraphrase it if I remember, like, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, all true revolutionaries are guided by a great feeling of love, and which is yeah, a wonderful quote in some ways, and a lot to put our heads around. But certainly there's parts of revolution, and you showed us where it's calling out deep injustice and things that need to change. And then there's another part of it, though, where it's not just destroying what's bad, but it's also building what's good. And I just love to hear if you have any thoughts about, as creatives, how we can think towards not just calling out injustice, but building a better world with sort of the talents that we have.
Oh yeah, could everybody hear that? It was a question about, you know, whether how to go beyond merely calling out injustice if you're a creative or someone who wants to effect change, go beyond just kind of pointing out the bad things and actually towards building new things. And I don't really have a great answer for that. But to back up for just a second, Che Guevara was kind of an asshole, who was a brilliant tactician, but like a lot of people, when he came to power, did some pretty awful things. So you won't ever see me as deep sympathy as I have for the Cuban people and admiration for getting rid of their dictator. I will probably never be wearing a Che Guevara T-shirt. But you know, it's actually something that I'm kind of wrestling with, just you know, on a micro level with our band, because it really is easy to just say, oh, that person's an idiot, or that's stupid, or we should change that. But you know, wrestling with like what are your kind of responsibilities, or what are your options beyond just being kind of a naysayer or you know, a gadfly. I guess on the one hand, it's hard to imagine that there's ever not going to be a need for that, because there are so many people who would look at the world and say the world's awesome. And so there's probably always going to be a role for people to kind of point out that that may not be the case. I mean, I think, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't really have anything other than a pat answer like building community or throwing your efforts behind things that you believe in. And there's, you know, no shortage of causes that could use the talents of the people in this room. So the question was, you know, have I seen any, I guess maybe positive effect from the songs we sing or the messages that we try and push? And I guess I don't really think of the band as being activists per se. I think we're sort of like the USO for activists. Like we're kind of the people who give what I would consider true activists, people that are writing letters, that are demonstrating, that are kind of getting arrested for causes. We're the people that tell those people, yes, what you're doing is awesome. We support you. There are people behind you who agree. I think it's more of a kind of community and morale builder than something that would affect like directly affect change. I mean, you know, the KFC video got you know, like was on PETA's blog for a day, and you know, got a tiny bit of attention, but you know, it's the drop that wears down the stone or something. I don't think there's ever. Well, anyway, certainly our band hasn't ever seen like, we spoke about this issue and look, it's fixed. Sadly, that's you know, kind of not how the world works.
So with your band, do you perform just as artists at venues, or
Yeah, absolutely.
Do your activities centralize on stunts like this?
No, I mean, we probably play more bars and clubs and than we do, you know, or not probably. We definitely play more bars and clubs and things like that than we do benefits or demonstrations or things like that. It was more of an even split back when 1070 was a big issue, because there was more activity and a cause that was kind of important to us. But you know, I think even though to some extent you can probably say that people who come out to bars, at least in certain places, you are doing a little preaching to the choir at that point, but you're definitely preaching to the choir when when messages like that are being played at a demonstration or something like that. So we like the idea of getting out and actually what is kind of fun, and so far we haven't been shot or anything, but it is fun to play venues or be grouped with bands that are maybe like, say, you know, like a traditional rockabilly band or a country band or something, where you know that the audience is probably not necessarily aligned with your religious views, and I like, and we sing, you know, we have something to piss everybody off. And so it's just kind of fun to scan the audience as you're singing and see like which particular song gets a particular person, whether they get excited and they're like elbowing, they're like big smile, like they caught the funny line or the thing that they're like, yeah, they're inspired. Or like you just see they're kind of bopping along to the music. Yes, I like bluegrass. And then just have their have the expression change completely when, you know, you talk about the fact that, you know, God is an illusion or something like that, and people looking at you slightly differently after that. So no, we don't. We enjoy, for lots of reasons, getting out to audiences beyond those that are necessarily preconditioned to like what we do.
All right, about time to wrap it up. It's 10 a.m. So everyone, another clap for Marc. Thank you again for coming out.
Thank you.